Hello, everyone. My name is David Stevens. I'm Vice Dean in the Faculty of Science and Professor in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. On behalf of the Faculty of Science, I'd like to welcome you to the 8th Sun and Science session this summer, which is part of our regular Soup and Science series. So this is an opportunity for professors and students to showcase some of the research they do in our faculty. So this morning we've got three great speakers who will be presenting their research. We've got Professor Nigel Roulet from the Department of Geography, Professor Will Hamilton from the School of Computer Science, and Professor Eric Galbraith from the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. So they'll be presenting over about 5 minutes some of their work, and then when the presentations are complete, you'll receive a message to join a breakout room. So in the breakout room, you'll have the opportunity to interact with the speakers, talk to them about their presentations and their work generally. And the presenters will rotate through the room, so there'll be about 10 minutes spent in each of those sessions. And then when the three breakout room sessions are complete, you'll be returned to the general meeting, and then Preeti will conclude with some remarks. The first speaker today then is Professor Nigel Roulet. He's in Department of Geography, and in fact he's the chair in that department. So Nigel, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about a little bit of a research that we've been actually working on for about 30 years at McGill. And it's about a landscape in Canada that most of you won't have thought about. Some of you may have experienced, but it actually is one of Canada's most prominent landscapes, and it's peatlands. What are peatlands? Well, peatlands are simply land that has organic deposits as the form of peat dead plants that have accumulated over thousands of years on the landscape since the glaciation. They are all over Canada. They go from Newfoundland right through to the Northwest Territories. The concentration by far is in the boreal. Over the globe, they cover about, over Canada, or over the globe, they cover about 3% of the land. They store about 500 gigatons of carbon. Now, gigatons of carbon are difficult to think about. That's 10 to the 15 grams. But it's equivalent to about 25% of the terrestrial biological carbon, and it's also equivalent to what's in the atmosphere right now in terms of CO2. 12% of Canada is covered by these, and they store 150 gigatons of carbon. They are Canada's single largest store. And you see some pictures of them from the permafrost regions, from Mer Bleu, which is a site we've worked on a lot, from the Hudson's Bay lowlands. They are formed by the plants that grow on them, and the champion plant for our peatlands in Canada is sphagnum. And over thousands and thousands of years, because the production of these plants exceeds decomposition, they build up these huge, massive depths of peat. This is a peatland that's about 8 meters thick, and you just see the vegetation right at the very top, but all the rest of that mass is dead organic material. Most of you interact with peat, not in peatlands themselves, but when you go to a garden shop. And peat moss is used in gardens for plants in your apartment. And then those of you that are involved in planting any bedding plants right now, they all come with peat. If we look at a map of Canada, the top map is the probability of peatland distribution in Canada. And the darker areas are areas where over 90% of the landscape is covered with peatlands. So you can see this huge swath of peatlands across the boreal regions of Canada. The bottom graph, which is the color, the hot red, shows the high areas of carbon deposits. And the reason why I put this up is everybody's excited about tropical rainforests, but those red areas contain 10 times to 50 times the amount of carbon per square meter that a tropical rainforest would contain. So this is a huge amount of carbon. The big difference between the tropical rainforest is this carbon, 99.9% of it is dead. It's not in plants. It's not live carbon. So the threats to peatlands are, one, climate change. This map shows the darker reds are the areas that are increasing in temperature, but the entire part of Canada is slated to increase somewhere between 5 and 7 degrees C, and that certainly would affect peatlands. And the second thing is land use change. We're doing an awful lot of land use change in the north. We extract peat for agricultural, horticultural purposes. We inadvertently put in seismic lines, which really alter the peatlands. Mining, while mining isn't for the peat, it actually destroys the peatlands. So we've been monitoring for the last 30 years, studying this through measuring directly. It's a little bit like Star Trek. We have the technology now to do this instantaneously, that we can measure CO2, methane exchanges, nitrous oxide exchanges, and we do it through various different meteorological techniques and using chambers. We spent a huge amount of time in the laboratory doing incubations of peat and analyzing them on gas chromatographs, for example, or a DOC analyzer to figure out what the carbon constituents are. We do an awful lot of modeling in our department, so we've developed the models that are actually now on the Canadian GCMs, the Earth System models for doing the analysis. And in the last 10 years, we've actually done an awful lot of remote sensing using Earth satellites from NASA called MODIS to be able to analyze the carbon exchanges. What that research has told us is the best thing to do if we want to preserve Canada's peatlands and keep it out of the atmosphere, the CO2 in the atmosphere, is leave them alone. If that's not possible, then what you want to do is mitigate the disturbance by land management, and we've developed a number of strategies that one could do that. If that's not possible, restoration, restore what you've disturbed, and we with other universities have developed some really good techniques for doing that. And then alternatively, you want to replace the carbon. Now that was going to be my last slide, but I've got a news flash for you, a late breaking news slide. On Thursday last week, peatlands down in the Rivière du Loup area caught fire. And actually this is a fire on a peatland by Lambert Peat Moss, which is one of the companies we work with. That's caught on fire. It's now actually burning most of the peatland in that area. And the smog that we've been experiencing in Montreal over the last few days is a result of that fire. It's coming in from that fire. If you think this is an esoteric topic, think back to, most of you probably don't think back to Russia in 2010, but it's estimated that there were 40,000 people that died in Moscow due to respiratory problems of the peat fire, from the peat fires that were burning around Moscow at that time. So hopefully you know a little bit more about peatlands, and I'll see you in the breakout room.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So the next speaker then is Professor Will Hamilton from Computer Science.
All right, thank you very much. So changing topics just a little bit, what I want to discuss today is the high-level insight behind the kind of research that I do. So I'm in the computer science department. I work primarily on machine learning, and I'm here at McGill in the computer science department, and I also spend part of my time up at the MILA, Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. And so I'm just going to describe a little bit the kind of machine learning research that me and my lab do. So generally, the goal in the standard machine learning paradigm is that we're given a large number of input data points. So these could be images, these could be documents, and our goal is to take all of these independent different points, each representing some object, and to make some prediction about them. So for example, if we're looking at images, we might try to classify the objects in those images. If we're looking at documents, maybe we're trying to classify the sentiment in those documents. And so this is really the standard, the classical machine learning paradigm. So in contrast, what I focus on in my group is what we call relational machine learning. So rather than thinking about a set of independent data points, so a set of documents that are completely independent from one another, or a number of different images that have no connection to one another, instead we focus on data sets where the really important information in these data sets is actually captured within the relationships between these data points. So to give a few examples of what this relational data looks like in the wild, so we'll call these usually graph or network data sets. One example here would be social networks. So if you're looking at social networks on online websites such as Facebook or Twitter, these can all be represented naturally as relational data. Another really interesting one is economic networks. So you can really think about the relationships in terms of trade and in terms of other types of geopolitical relationships between countries as really being represented as these relational structures. Another really important one, and one of the really big data sets that we focus on in my group, is biomedical networks. So here we're trying to understand the relationship between different biological objects. So often we'll represent proteins as one particular node or vertex in this graph. We want to understand how these proteins might relate or interact with other proteins, how they might relate or interact with different diseases, and so on. Another very big data set that we work with is information networks. So things that are representing knowledge, often called knowledge graphs. So for example, when you Google things, one of the big ways that Google is actually operating and answering the questions you ask is by having these large graphs or relational stores of information in the background. The internet, of course, itself is another purely relational data set. And then lastly, an example that's quite close to McGill, given the strength of what's done in the Montreal Neurological Institute, is the fact that you can also represent the brain as networks of neurons. And so in my lab, we develop new kinds of machine learning and especially deep learning techniques that can handle all these different kinds of relational data structures. And to just give a couple examples of what this actually looks like in the real world. So one really important application, and one that we've been paying a lot of attention to actually just in the past few months, is the application of these techniques for actually predicting drug interactions and the power of different combinations of drug, what kind of side effects you might see. And actually, we've been investigating this in collaboration with a number of researchers, both in academia and in industry, in a number of initiatives to fight COVID-19. So here you can really think about the interaction between different types of drugs, the interaction between diseases and symptoms and so on, always being represented as one big graph or network. And we're trying to do machine learning on these structures. The other very different application that I've been actively involved in the past is more on the e-commerce side. And so in fact, part doesn't power all of it, but if you ever spend time on the website Pinterest, part of what actually runs their recommender system is some of the techniques, some of the algorithms that we've developed in my group for actually learning on graph structures. And so very happy to chat about any of this in the breakout sessions after the main talks. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Will. So the final speaker today then is Professor Eric Galbraith from the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences.
Eric, you're on mute. Oh, hang on, Eric, you're still on mute. There we go.
Good. Sorry. When I took over control of the screen, my mute button disappeared. So thanks very much, Dave. Thanks for putting this together. Great to see the soup and science tradition continuing despite COVID. So this morning, I would like to talk to you all about the research that we're doing in my group, the Integrated Earth System Dynamics Laboratory, focusing on work that's integrating humans into Earth system models. So what's an Earth system model? Basically, an Earth system model is a toy computer-generated planet. So it takes the Earth that we know and love and subdivides it on a grid structure. So it breaks it up into boxes. So you get a three-dimensional atmosphere, a three-dimensional ocean, and a two-dimensional land surface. There are state variables that describe what's going on inside each one of those discrete boxes. And then you start from some initial conditions, and the state variables evolve forward over time according to equations that represent the dynamics of what's going on within the Earth system. And those are all grounded in physical principles. So these Earth system models have been extremely successful in teaching us a lot about how the planet functions. Basically, they have these 4 components. They started off actually as atmospheric models, and then they coupled oceans to the atmospheric models to make coupled climate models. And then to these were added land and ecosystem components. And what's really essential about the Earth system model approach is that the coupling between these different components is 2 ways. So what happens in the atmosphere affects the ocean and vice versa, and similarly for all of the other components. And one of the most important things that the Earth system models have been used for is from trying to understand the impacts of humans on the Earth system. And that's primarily been through our greenhouse gas emissions, how our greenhouse gas emissions have been changing the atmosphere, and then how that trickles down through the rest of the Earth system from the atmosphere. And more recently, people have been looking at the direct impacts of humans also in the ocean, on land, and on the ecosystem through our other activities. But almost everything that has been done in the Earth system model framework looking at human impacts has just been taking humans as an external forcing. So humans are doing stuff, and then we try to estimate what humans are doing and then apply that to the Earth system model. And this really amounts to studying the problems that are being caused by the humans, but not the solutions. Because the solutions have to come from within the human system. If we're going to change things in order to address sustainability issues and climate change, it's not the natural part of the Earth system that needs to change, it's the human part of the system. So what we're really working towards trying to do is to include humans within the same framework that's used for the rest of the system, so that we can really study the 2-way interactions between the human system and the rest of the Earth system model framework. So, okay, that sounds nice, but how do you do it? And it's challenging, which is why it's not being widely done. And that's because there is a massive gap between the natural scientists that build Earth system models and do the rest of it, and social scientists that study the human system. And when you get down to it, most natural sciences are somehow based on fundamental biology, chemistry, and physics, whereas social sciences generally are not. Instead, the core terms in social sciences are very different. They're things like well-being and values and behaviors. So how do you interface these things within a single numerical framework where you can learn something about how it works? We need to build bridges across that natural social science gap. I think this is a really essential thing to do. And the way we're working on it is something I call Earth system economics. And the idea here is really that it focuses on biophysical state variables for the human system, just as we do for the rest of the Earth system. And we try to deal with most of the complicated and interesting things that humans do through quantifying population level time allocation. This is a very useful way to try and understand what large populations of humans are doing, not trying to worry about individuals, but really looking at large population scales. And there's a diagram with some arrows, in case anybody wants to ask questions about it. The people who are carrying out this work are the IESDers, and what they do is basically comb through the existing literature, data on the internet, every now and then a tiny bit of field work, not very much. And then they take those things in order to develop new theory, write equations that capture what seems to be happening in the world, test them against the data. And then the ultimate goal of this is to provide surprising insights on how the human Earth coupled system works. And as one example of something we're just finishing up, this is the world's first coupled hunter-gatherer ecosystem model, Forge. And what this does is it has a very well-resolved, realistic global vegetation model. We have humans that can exist throughout the planet that take their 24 hours per day and partition it between gathering, hunting, or doing something else. And then the model, which is trained against data, gives a dynamical prediction of human populations, which agrees well with observations and has given some surprising insights on how important growing season length is for human populations and human diets, actually. And things we're continuing on with now are building a global database of time allocation in the world today, thinking about the global cycling of human-made things and how to represent that in simple ways. And actually what I'm most excited about is neuroscience-based quantitative metrics for technology and social characteristics. And looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.